what is this? Great. So this is a tool. You know, in Ethiopia, you probably would make coffee in no other way, right? This is the way to make coffee if you really want true Ethiopian coffee. So similarly, when we make learning objectives, there are particular tools and approaches that we can use to make those more effective. So we'll describe two particular approaches today called ABC and SMART. So in the videos, we talked about this formula of an action verb, topic and content and context. And we'll build off these because there are a number of different approaches that you can use. These are just a few. So the first is this idea of audience, behavior, condition, and degree. So your audience is who, your behavior will do what, your condition under what conditions, and how much or well, so to what degree. So if you think about this in application, you can think about the audience, you all or your trainees, anesthesiologist or future anesthesiologist. The behavior will be able to develop PowerPoint presentations. The condition, which incorporates new instructional strategies successfully. All right, you can think about how you might use the ABC method to make your objective even more specific and measurable. This is what Dr. Blinn was just referring to, Dr. Hinnock, when you're talking about your verbs and your specificity, you can use the ABC method as a way to do that. Quite easy to think about, and when you have to break out your objectives can be a tool for doing that. The other is SMART objectives. And give me a thumbs up if you've tried this approach or you're aware of it. SMART objectives. Yes? Great. So the SMART objectives, and those of you who are familiar with it can really be guides in your small group discussions. But this idea that you need to be specific, and many of you have referenced that today, this idea of being specific, being measurable, also being achievable or actionable, realistic. So what can you really achieve in a session or in a course, and time bound? And these are ways that you can develop objectives for your courses, but also for goals, for grants, for larger programs, for other activities. So you can really use this tool for a number of different areas, if you will. So if you think about specific, it means focused on a tangible outcome. There's a clear definition of success, right? So we know whether or not our learners have achieved those. Challenging but possible, right? And achievable. And that they are aligned with resources or they're realistic for the capacities of our learners, where they are in their training. And then it helps oftentimes to put a deadline. So if you noticed in the beginning of this session, it said by the end of this session, participants will be able to do something or know something, right? So by the end of the session, I know that you all can create clear objectives, clear goals. I know that using SMART or using ABC, because you're not going to let me down. So if we think about this in practice, let's look at this example. So specific, early career anesthesiologist will be able to apply best practices in learning theory and instructional planning to develop a 10-slide PowerPoint presentation incorporating a teaching philosophy over a 2-week training period. Now that is a big objective, but I'm gonna know if the learners have met that objective, right? Now, some people could say, oh, it should be broken down. It's not sufficiently specific. They're pieces that are not measurable. And so this is an example of a way that you can continue, you can develop a SMART objective, continue to hone it by getting feedback from your partners in your breakout sessions or otherwise. So some ways that you can avoid some of the common mistakes, such as maybe being too lofty, unspecific, unmeasurable, is to think about some of the kind of common mistakes that you can avoid. So one of those is having objectives focused on what the teacher can do versus what the learner should be able to demonstrate. So this objective, we will review competencies and milestones. So that's really me, right? That's not what the learner can demonstrate. But you could shift it to say by the completion of the session, students will demonstrate mastery of analytical and diagnostic competencies. Now that's actually a pretty broad objective, but it still demonstrates this shift from the instructor to the learner. There are also common mistakes when you're focusing on the teaching process. So students will rotate in 3 clinics and then meet on Friday afternoons for group activities. Well, that's not really an objective. It's more of a process. So you could talk about after a rotation and group projects, what the students will be able to do, right? They're demonstrating what they've learned, and it's a student-focused or a learner-focused objective. And this is really hard, and I have to check myself often, is that your objective has more than one outcome. And you see this in surveys called double-barreled surveys, where you're asking one question and maybe you get half the answer, but you don't get the other. So a common way to fix this is just to divide them up. You can just have more objectives where you're really trying to map those objectives onto your learning activities and your assessments. So if we think about some of these and some of these challenges and how we might improve these, I will leave these in the session and you can look at them later. I have 3 here for how to improve the learning objectives, but I think actually it's more helpful to go back into our breakout sessions and actually use one of the ABC or SMART methods just for one objective. Some of those aspects of SMART or ABC may be more difficult or less difficult in practice. So what I'll ask you to do is continue to develop those, and you'll use them in your final presentation and also in your course map. So today we really at least tried to reframe using the backward design and thinking about Bloom's taxonomy and specifically working on your own objectives with ABC and SMART. This is a process not achievable in a 90-minute session, but something that you'll continue to hone and work on over time. It seems simple in practice, but it's quite complex, as you've seen, but you've done an excellent job. So these were our session objectives, and you really achieved those. So once again, I give you an A+, and you'll continue to work on them. By next session, so Dr. Bond will teach next week, you'll develop an effective PowerPoint slide that includes your goals and objectives that you developed this week with continued enhancement, thinking about and reevaluating each of those objectives to make sure they're SMART or follow the ABC method.